Okay, I'm still sat here with Constantine Sanders, who's Professor of Philosophy at Hertfordshire, and we're sat here in Regent's Park in Oxford today. And we've been talking about philosophy of action and belief and reason and motivation and why we do things. Who cares? Why does it matter? What's kind of the so what question about
that's
that?
a very good and difficult question, and I'm torn two ways in this. I have moments. I was recently part of a debate arguing that philosophy doesn't matter, and part of me does believe
Yeah.
this, that we can, things can be interesting in their own right, and maybe that's the end of it. On the other hand, I think, well, maybe that's true of most philosophy, but surely not philosophy of action.
But your bit of philosophy.
My bit of philosophy
Other
matters.
people's, yeah.
Exactly. And sometimes maybe the smaller questions matter more than the larger ones. And so I can give you two very different kinds of reason
Sure,
why this matters. And I'll start with the maybe possibly smaller of the two. So if you've got a kind of reductivist account of motivation, or why humans or maybe all animals act or behave as they do, whether it's power, sex, money, and so on, it can affect everything from the kind of advertising you create in order to get people to do things, from how you construct your supermarkets, what kind of communication technology you build, and so on. And to focus on this last example, so John Locke, who we don't think of as a psychologist, but was very, very influential in the history of philosophy, thought that we communicate in order to exchange information. And what we're really doing is, I speak in kind of English, you understand the English, translate it into your brain and pass it back, and what I'm doing is I'm kind of trying to get this information. We use a common language to get this information from one, and you might then think, why do we want that? Because information is power, or gets you sex or money or whatever. Now, if you think that's the point of all communication, then when you're, say, building your latest iPhones or your apps or your Skype programs, or you're trying to invent the new Snapchat or whatever, what you do is email and so on, you're building technology that helps you to achieve this single aim or goal, to exchange information. And you might do this very fast and so on, but maybe that's not the only reason why we communicate. Maybe when I send you a birthday card, it's not necessarily to give you any information, but it's a kind of gift. Just like if I were to give you this book, which I won't because it's my only copy. I mean, maybe this is a bad example because it contains some information, one hopes. But if I were to give you my sunglasses,
but if you were to give me the book, you would.
It's not a giving of information. It would be very low anyway. I might as well give you.
It'd be an emotional.
Exactly.
Thing.
So it's a kind of it's a different kind of gift. And so it's not clear that all forms of confusion. Sometimes you call a friend not to exchange any information, but just because they're your friend, they're your mate, that's what you do. You meet up not to exchange information. So this is a sense in which, if you're under the grip of a particular theory of action, it might limit the sort of apps and devices you build, because you think this is what we want, and it might exclude all sorts of interesting things we could be doing instead. So that's one example. I don't know.
I was just thinking for a second, actually, before we get to the second example. Think about that. Makes me think that complexity of motivation that you talked about previously in our other conversation is actually often what you see is that devices built for quite some the kind of Lockean information exchange. People subvert them. Yeah. What's happened is the reason that I can't predict the next Snapchat and become a billionaire or whatever, is that people are kind of complicated, and actually what they want to use them for isn't what they were designed for often. And actually one thing the internet's sort of shown us is how people won't use things for what they're meant to be used for, and come up with, it's one of the joys of it. Partly.
Yes, that's exactly
kind of
right.
subversion
So when we're not doing theory and we're just being in the world, all this stuff comes out. It will come out, and then you see all the different uses we have that aren't anticipated when you've got. And of course, this is a good thing, and you can make progress in these ways. But if we could, from the outset, think about these things, then maybe you could make your millions.
I'm still trying.
So I can make you millions. The second reason won't make you any money, but it's a more ethical reason. So you have these huge debates in ethics between especially consequentialists on the one hand and deontologists on the other, maybe virtue ethicists as well. And these debates are about what makes an action right. Is it the consequences? Is it the intention, the purpose, the reason with which you acted? And these theories are really divided. They're really opposed on, but we have different accounts of what makes an action right. They can't both be right. But if you distinguish the thing done from the doing, then one question that arises is, what makes it right? What makes this thing right that you or I could do together or alone? And what makes my doing it right? So, for example, we might both give the same amount of money or the same percentage of our salaries to charity, and we're both maybe we pick the right charity and we're both doing the right thing, but you're doing it in order to help people in need, and I'm doing it to show off in front of a colleague. So my doing it is vicious in a way in which you're doing it is virtuous, but we both do the right thing, yet I'm not acting rightly. And so once we start making these distinctions, you then start to wonder, maybe virtue ethics is better suited for an account of acting rightly or wrongly, and consequentialism better suited for an account of doing the right thing.
Because the problem that many students have, and many school children have when looking at consequentialism versus deontology, is they see through it in that it's really simplistic.
Right.
And they know why utilitarianism is such a nightmare and why it's such a horrific way of thinking and reduces ethics to this mechanical system. And yet they also know that an ethics that pays no attention to consequences and thinks they're irrelevant morally is kind of just mad.
That seems wrong too, right?
And they look at both and they say, well, obviously these are both insane, and yet I've still got to choose. It's that kind of ridiculous choice. So I think there is a real need to bring to the surface the question that actually human behaviour, which of course is going to include ethics fundamentally, is going to be much murkier than that and require much kind of fine-grained sort of disaggregation.
I think that's right. And someone who's not normally thought of as a fine-grained philosopher, especially by people who don't read him much, I think is Hegel. And I think Hegel gets this pretty right. He says that the leaves of pure willing, are dry leaves that never were green. So it's sort of, if you base all your ethics on just the will, you can excuse everything, right? All acts are done with a good intention. Yet on the other hand, he also says, we've got to accept the consequences of action that come from our willing, even if we didn't intend them in the way they pan out, right? A stone once thrown is the devil's, is what he says. So, and once we introduce these different conceptions of action, I mean, Hegel has his own distinctions between different senses of action. We get senses in which it's not just were you or were you not responsible for this action, but it may be that you were responsible for it qua known but not qua intended, or maybe you should have known but you didn't. And there's different ways in which what we really want to know was, who did it? Were they responsible? Yes or no? But the answer is far more
especially given the conversation we had previously about beliefs and reasons. If I did it because, as soon as you've got that because in there, it's implying some previous state and then some causal connection.
It's a dangerous word.
And so I did it because I believed they were the murderer. So I threw the rock after them when they tried to run away. And they weren't, but I killed them. And then you get to a whole moral thing about, was he responsible? Was the person who gave them the misinformation responsible?
That's right.
The relationship between beliefs and reasons becomes very pertinent, not just a kind of background chatter, but the ultimate moral yes.
And this is crystallized, I think this is maybe bringing my Greek upbringing in Oedipus. And forget the kind of Freudian stuff on Oedipus. What's crystallized in the Oedipus example is that he's acting intentionally, and he's doing all these things intentionally, and he's the one doing them, and yet he doesn't intend to kill his father. He doesn't intend and so he's kind of, on the one hand, knows that he's got to take responsibility for these acts because he is the one who did them. Nobody makes him do them. For all talk of fatalism in Greek philosophy, it's nothing like the causal determinism of neuroscience. And so these actions are imputed upon him as his own, and yet there's something is missing, which is the desire, intention to do these things. And I
think it really kind of brings surface the kind of the complexity of them, and I think hopefully gives people a sense that they're actually worth studying at some point.
It can matter.
Thank you.